Shadows of Yesterday. Julian Reed stared at the untouched glass of champagne, the bubbles rising and dissipating like the opportunities he'd prioritized over everything else in his life. The New York skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the charity gala, a view he'd once promised would be theirs to share. Now it was just another backdrop for another business function. "Impressive turnout, Julian," remarked Camille Thorpe, his PR director. "The Julian Reed Foundation's donation to Single Parent Support Network will generate excellent press." Julian nodded absently. At 34, he'd built Nexus Technologies into a $16 billion empire, revolutionizing renewable energy infrastructure across 3 continents. His face had graced fortune and time. He owned penthouses in 4 countries. Yet somehow the hollowness persisted, a vacuum no achievement seemed capable of filling. "The executive director wants to introduce you to some of the program beneficiaries," Camille continued, gesturing toward a small gathering across the ballroom. "5 minutes of your charm would go miles for our public image." Julian straightened his custom Tom Ford suit and crossed the marble floor, exchanging practiced smiles with donors and board members. 6 years of networking had perfected his public persona, confident, measured, with just enough warmth to seem approachable without inviting true connection. That's when he saw her. Olivia Bennett stood in conversation with the foundation director, her chestnut hair shorter than he remembered, falling just past her shoulders instead of cascading down her back. She wore a simple navy dress, understated compared to the glittering gowns surrounding her, yet she commanded the space with the quiet dignity he'd fallen in love with. Julian faltered mid-stride. The room seemed to compress, voices fading into a distant hum. 6 years since she'd walked away from his increasingly empty promises. 6 years of him drowning himself in work rather than confronting the wreckage he'd created. Before he could retreat or advance, a small figure darted between conversations, weaving through designer gowns and tuxedos, straight toward Olivia. The boy couldn't have been more than 5, with a mop of dark curls and a blue button-down shirt partially untucked. "Mom!" he called, tugging at Olivia's hand. "They have chocolate fountains. 2 of them!" "Inside voice, Noah," she reminded him gently, smoothing his wayward hair with instinctive tenderness. Julian stood frozen, mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with business projections. 5, perhaps 6 years old, born after their separation but not long after. The timing aligned with painful precision. The boy, Noah, turned, scanning the room with unabashed curiosity until his gaze landed on Julian. Something in those hazel eyes, in the slight furrow of concentration between his brows, struck Julian with breathtaking familiarity. He was looking at his own expressions rendered in miniature. Noah tilted his head, studying Julian with the unfiltered directness only children possess. "Are you the man from Mom's pictures?" Olivia turned, following her son's gaze. The color drained from her face as recognition dawned. For 3 heartbeats, they simply stared at each other across the crowded room. 2 planets that had once shared an orbit, now existing in entirely separate solar systems. Then Noah spoke again, his innocent question slicing through 6 years of silence. "Mom says you made buildings that don't hurt the sky. Are you my dad?" The crystal glass slipped from Julian's fingers, shattering against marble with a sound like breaking ice. But Julian barely registered it, transfixed by the living testament of what he'd left behind, what he hadn't even known existed. "Retry you." Whispers of Truth. The private room of Le Ciel restaurant overlooked Central Park, its hushed atmosphere a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling between its 3 occupants. Noah sat at a separate table nearby, happily absorbed in the tablet Olivia had brought, headphones securing his attention to an educational game rather than the conversation about to unfold. "He has your eyes," Julian said quietly, breaking the tense silence that had settled since they'd agreed to talk somewhere private. "And apparently your fascination with how things work. He's been taking apart that game and rebuilding it for 20 minutes. Olivia's fingers tightened around her water glass. "He's brilliant, constantly curious. His kindergarten teacher says she can't keep enough books in the classroom for him." The pride in her voice was palpable. and Julian felt the simultaneous surge of warmth and devastating loss. 5 years of first words, first steps, first everything, vanished into a void he could never reclaim. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question emerged rougher than he intended, edged with the hurt he'd been suppressing since the moment of revelation. 6 years, Olivia. Were you ever going to let me know I had a son? Olivia met his gaze unflinchingly. I tried, Julian. 3 times, actually. The first was a week after I discovered I was pregnant. Your assistant said you were in Singapore and couldn't be disturbed for anything short of a corporate emergency. A bitter smile touched her lips. Apparently, impending fatherhood didn't qualify. Julian flinched, remembering that acquisition, how he'd instructed his team to shield him from distractions during the critical negotiation phase. The second time, she continued, I came to your office. Waited 4 hours in the lobby until your security escorted me out because I didn't have an appointment. I was 7 months pregnant by then. I never knew. The third time was after Noah was born. I wrote you a letter, pages long, explaining everything. Sent it to your personal address with pictures of him. The envelope came back marked, Return to Sender. She paused, vulnerability briefly fracturing her composure. That's when I decided the universe was sending me a message. You'd made your choice long before I left, Julian. Your company was your child. I refused to make Noah compete for scraps of your attention the way I did. Julian stared at his untouched scotch, remembering how he'd changed addresses that year, routing all mail through his executive assistant who had strict instructions about personal correspondence. The protective systems he'd built to maximize efficiency had effectively walled him off from the most important news of his life. I don't have excuses, Olivia, he said finally. I was obsessed with building something that would last, something meaningful. I convinced myself that once I achieved enough, I could come back and make everything right with us. He glanced at Noah, who was laughing quietly at something on his game. I never imagined what I was sacrificing in the process. He asks about you, Olivia admitted reluctantly. Not specifically you. He didn't know who you were until today. But he asks about his father. Why other kids have dads and he doesn't? She hesitated. I keep your old pictures. I've told him you're a man who builds amazing things that help people. I never wanted him to think he was abandoned. Something broke inside Julian, a dam of suppressed emotion he'd contained for 6 years. Thank you for that, he managed, voice thick. I know you had every right to hate me. I tried hating you, she said softly. It was easier than missing you. Julian gathered his courage and asked the question whose answer terrified him. Where do we go from here? I've missed 5 years, but I don't want to miss another day. I want to know my son, Olivia. I want to earn a place in his life, in both your lives, if that's possible. Olivia looked over at Noah, her expression softening. He deserves to know his father. But Julian, she turned back, her eyes hardening with protective resolve. I need to be absolutely clear. If you're going to be in his life, it can't be when it's convenient for your schedule. You can't breeze in with expensive gifts when you have a free weekend and disappear for months. He needs consistency, not grand gestures, I understand. Do you? She challenged. Because the Julian I knew lived by his calendar and people were scheduled between meetings. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough to feel the warmth. I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm asking for the chance to show you both who I've become, the man who finally understands what he lost. As if sensing he was being discussed, Noah looked up and waved enthusiastically at them. Julian waved back, a tentative smile forming. We take this slowly, Olivia decided, her voice firm despite the uncertainty in her eyes. For Noah's sake. Julian nodded, understanding this wasn't redemption, merely the opportunity to earn it. One day at a time. Bridges built slowly. The playground at Washington Square Park bustled with Saturday morning energy, children swarming over climbing structures while parents clutched coffee cups and made small talk on surrounding benches. Julian sat awkwardly on a wooden bench, painfully aware of how his casual attire, premium denim and a simple black sweater, still marked him as an outsider among the neighborhood parents in their well-worn weekend clothes. This was his 4th Saturday with Noah. 4. Consecutive weekends where Julian Reed, whose typical Saturday mornings involved international conference calls and strategy sessions, instead found himself learning the intricate social politics of 5-year-olds and the surprising complexity of building a proper sandcastle. "Higher, Dad! Push me higher!" Noah called from the swings, his legs pumping enthusiastically. The word Dad still startled Julian each time, a title he hadn't earned but was desperately trying to deserve. Julian moved behind the swing, giving another gentle push. "Any higher and you might take flight, pilot." Noah's laughter bubbled up, uninhibited and joyous. "I want to fly, all the way to the moon. Maybe we start with the clouds and work our way up," Julian suggested, noting Olivia watching them from a nearby bench. She offered a small nod of acknowledgement, a tiny gesture that nonetheless represented monumental progress from the guarded wariness of their first few encounters. Later, as Noah concentrated on an elaborate sand structure with 2 other children, Julian hesitantly approached Olivia's bench. "He seems to be having fun," he ventured, sitting beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "He talks about you all week," Olivia admitted, "about how you explained why buildings need strong foundations and how you helped him build that model rocket." She paused, studying him. "You've surprised me, Julian. 4 Saturdays without cancellations or assistants calling with emergencies." "I've restructured my entire leadership team," Julian replied. "Promoted Rebecca Chen to acting CEO. The board nearly had collective heart failure, but the company's fundamentals are strong enough to withstand my reduced involvement." Olivia's eyebrows rose. "That's significant. It should have happened years ago. I built systems that depended entirely on my constant presence because it fed my ego to be needed. It wasn't just unfair to you. It was unsustainable business practice." He watched Noah patting the top of his sand tower with focused determination. "Besides, I'm discovering that watching him figure out how the world works is infinitely more fascinating than quarterly projections." A comfortable silence settled between them, the first since their reunion. Julian savored it, remembering how they used to spend Sunday mornings reading beside each other, sharing space without feeling compelled to fill it with words. "He wants you to come for dinner tomorrow," Olivia said eventually, "to see his room and meet Franklin." "Franklin?" "His goldfish. Very distinguished. Wears a top hat." "Well, a plastic castle with what Noah insists is a top hat." Julian smiled, feeling a warmth spreading through his chest. "I'd be honored to meet Franklin. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. Though fair warning, our apartment isn't quite the luxury penthouse you're used to." "I've downsized, actually," Julian said, surprising her. "Sold the penthouse last month. Bought a brownstone in the village. 3 bedrooms instead of 6, but it has a small backyard. I thought maybe Noah might enjoy having a space to play when he visits. If that would be okay someday." The implication hung between them. Julian wasn't just making temporary adjustments. He was rebuilding his life around the possibility of family. Olivia's expression softened with something unreadable. "You've changed." "I'm trying," he acknowledged. "Though some habits die hard. My assistant had to physically remove my laptop twice last week when I started working past midnight." A smile tugged at her lips, the first genuine one he'd seen directed at him. "The Julian Reed I knew once worked 3 days straight on an algorithm, surviving on nothing but espresso and sheer stubbornness. And you brought me soup and unplugged my monitors," he recalled, the memory warming him. "Said you'd only return them when I'd slept 8 hours. You were furious." "I was in love," he corrected softly. Too blind to recognize it properly. Their eyes met, a current of shared history passing between them, not just the pain of separation, but the countless small moments of connection that had once formed the foundation of something beautiful. The moment broke when Noah came running over, sand dusting his clothes. "Mom, Dad!" "I'm starving." Olivia checked her watch. "Lunchtime already? Where did the morning go?" "Can Dad come too?" Noah asked hopefully, his hand finding Julian's instinctively. Julian felt the small fingers wrap around his, marveling at how such a tiny point of contact could anchor him so completely to the present moment. Olivia hesitated only briefly before nodding. I think that would be nice. If your father doesn't have other plans? No plans, Julian said, squeezing his son's hand gently. Nothing more important than this. The weight of walls. The first real test came 3 months into their cautious rebuilding. Julian had established a rhythm. Wednesday evenings for dinner at Olivia's modest Brooklyn apartment, Saturday outings with Noah, and Sunday afternoons often spent together as a tentative family unit. His corporate involvement had stabilized at 20 hours weekly, enough to maintain strategic oversight without consuming his life. Everything was progressing until the Brussels conference. As founder of Nexus Technologies, Julian's keynote speech had been scheduled months before Noah entered his life. The conference fell on the weekend of Noah's 6th birthday celebration. I can fly back immediately after my speech, Julian explained, pacing Olivia's small kitchen after Noah had gone to bed. I'll miss the party by 3 hours, but I'll be there for the end. I've already arranged the private jet. Olivia leaned against the counter, arms crossed. 3 months of consistency, and now you're prioritizing work again. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Julian. This isn't just any meeting, Liv. The EU's new climate initiative could change the industry landscape, could revolutionize how we approach sustainability, could secure billions in new contracts. The familiar arguments sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Noah has been talking about having you at his birthday for weeks. He's told everyone at school his dad is coming. Julian stopped pacing, the weight of disappointment, Noah's and Olivia's, settling heavily on his shoulders. He'd promised himself he would be different, yet here he was, falling into old patterns at the first significant test. You're right, he conceded quietly. I'll call Rebecca tonight. She can deliver the keynote. Olivia studied him skeptically. Just like that? The Julian I knew would never miss an opportunity to be center stage. The Julian you knew didn't understand what he stood to lose. He sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. I've spent 16 years building a company that was supposed to change the world, and it has. But what's the point of changing the world if I can't be there for the people who matter most in it? Something shifted in Olivia's expression, a softening that had become increasingly frequent in recent weeks. This isn't about choosing between your work and your family, Julian. It never was. It's about finding balance. Balance hasn't exactly been my strong suit, he admitted ruefully. No, she agreed, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. The man I fell in love with only had 2 settings, completely present or entirely absent. The casual reference to their past relationship hung between them, neither addressing the implication that such feelings might still exist. They had been careful to focus solely on co-parenting, though Julian had not missed the gradual warming between them, lingering glances, conversations that extended long after Noah was asleep, the occasional brush of hands when passing coffee or helping with dishes. 2 nights later, Julian arrived at Olivia's apartment for their regular Wednesday dinner, only to find her distracted and tense. Noah chattered happily about birthday plans, oblivious to the strained atmosphere between the adults. After Noah's bedtime story, Julian now sharing this ritual with increasing comfort, Olivia motioned him back to the living room. Philip called today, she said without preamble. Julian stiffened. Philip Harrison. The architect Olivia had dated for nearly 8 months before Julian's reappearance in her life. She had ended the relationship shortly after Julian began spending time with Noah, explaining to Julian that it was too complicated to navigate new romantic waters while establishing co-parenting boundaries. He wants to get back together, she continued, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Says he misses us both, me and Noah. The thought of another man forming attachments to his son, to Olivia, sent a surge of possessiveness through Julian that surprised him with its intensity. I see, and what did you tell him? That I needed time to think. She met his gaze directly. Julian, we've been so focused on building this co-parenting relationship that we've avoided discussing what's happening between us. Is something happening between us? He asked carefully, heart hammering against his ribs. You tell me. You're here 4 days a week. We talk until midnight. Last week you fell asleep on this couch rather than drive home because we were still discussing that book. She took a steadying breath. Noah asked me yesterday if you were going to be his dad who lives with us, not just his dad who visits. Julian stepped closer, emboldened by her words. What do you want, Olivia? Because I've been trying desperately not to pressure you, not to assume that my place in Noah's life automatically grants me any right to hope for a place in yours. I'm scared, she admitted. Terrified, actually. When you left before, I didn't leave, he corrected gently. You walked away because I was already gone in every way that mattered, and you were right to go. Either way, it nearly broke me, she whispered. And now there's Noah to consider. If we tried again and failed... Julian closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I understand your fear. I share it. But Olivia, the difference is that I now understand what truly matters. It took losing you, and nearly losing the chance to know my son, to realize that success means nothing without someone to share it with. Their faces were inches apart now, years of suppressed emotions surfacing in the charged silence between them. I never stopped loving you, he confessed, even when I convinced myself that ambition was an acceptable substitute for happiness. Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Prove it to me, not with words or grand gestures. Show me day by day that this time will be different. Julian understood. Trust, once shattered, could only be rebuilt through consistent action, not declarations. One day at a time, he promised, echoing their agreement from months ago. However long it takes. When their lips finally met, it felt both familiar and entirely new, a reconciliation and a beginning, wrapped in the promise of a future they would craft more carefully this time. Constellations of Hope. 18 months after that fateful charity gala, Julian stood on the shores of Montauk, watching Noah race along the water's edge, his joyful shrieks carried away by the autumn breeze. The beachfront property, a modest cottage rather than the luxury mansion his wealth could afford, had become their weekend sanctuary over the past year, a neutral space where they had gradually knitted themselves into a family unit. He's convinced he'll find pirate treasure if he digs in exactly the right spot, Olivia said, joining Julian on the weathered deck. She handed him a mug of coffee, her fingers lingering against his as they had increasingly begun to do. Small, intentional touches that rebuilt intimacy one moment at a time. I may have encouraged that belief, Julian admitted with a smile. There's a chest buried about 20 yards from where he's digging now. Old coins, a compass, and a map I had specially made of the coastline. Olivia laughed, the sound still making his heart skip even after all these months of careful reconciliation. You're spoiling him. I prefer to think of it as nurturing his sense of adventure and discovery. Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against the brisk October air. Did you see his face when we told him we're staying until Wednesday? I thought he might actually explode from excitement. That's because you told his teacher he's doing field research on marine ecosystems. She nestled against him, fitting perfectly into the space beside him that had remained empty for so long. Rebecca called, by the way. The Beijing contract is officially signed. Good. That's the last major initiative I needed to oversee before the transition is complete. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Starting next month, I'm officially just a board member with minority ownership stake. 20 hours a month instead of 20 hours a week. Olivia turned in his arms, searching his face. Are you sure about this? Nexus has been your life for so long. It was never my life. It was my distraction, from genuine connection, from vulnerability, from the terrifying prospect of building something that couldn't be controlled by algorithms and strategic planning. His gaze drifted to Noah, who had abandoned treasure hunting in favor of building an elaborate sand structure. My life is here with both of you. The company will continue changing the world without my daily involvement. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their son's creative process unfold along the shoreline. After several minutes, Olivia spoke softly. I've been thinking about the brownstone. Julian tensed slightly. This had been their most consistent point of gentle contention, whether to combine their separate lives into a single home. Julian had never pushed, respecting Olivia's need for independence after their painful history. What about it? He asked carefully. Noah's school district paperwork came in yesterday. They need to know his primary residence for next year. She turned to face him fully. I think it's time we gave him one address instead of two. If your offer still stands, Julian's heart thundered in his chest. My offer will always stand, Olivia, but only if you're certain. I am. Her eyes, those same hazel depths he'd fallen into a decade ago, held a certainty he hadn't seen since before their separation. You've shown up consistently, patiently, completely for 18 months. Not just for Noah, but for us. For this second chance we never thought we'd have. Julian reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small velvet box he'd carried for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Perhaps there was no such thing as perfect timing, only perfect intention. I had a much more elaborate plan involving string quartets and fireworks, he said with a nervous laugh. But standing here with you, watching our son build sandcastles on a random Tuesday morning, this feels right. Understanding dawned in Olivia's eyes as he knelt on the weathered deck boards. 7.5 years ago, I lost sight of what truly mattered, Julian said, voice steady despite his racing pulse. I chose ambition over love, achievement over connection. It was the greatest mistake of my life, and one I've spent every day since trying to correct. He opened the box, revealing not a flashy diamond but a simple platinum band inlaid with small sapphires, the exact blue of the ocean horizon behind them. I'm not asking you to forget our past, Olivia. I'm asking you to believe in our future, to trust that I've learned what creates a meaningful life, not achievements or acquisitions, but moments of genuine connection with the people I love. He took a steadying breath. Will you marry me? Not the man I was, but the man you've helped me become? Before Olivia could answer, a small voice piped up beside them. Are you asking Mom to be your wife? They turned to find Noah watching the scene with intense curiosity, sand coating his clothes and a serious expression on his young face. Yes, Julian answered honestly, I am. Noah considered this for a moment, head tilted in that particular way that mirrored Julian's own contemplative expression. Does that mean we'd be a forever family? Not just sometimes? That's exactly what it means, Olivia answered, tears gathering in her eyes. If that's what we all want, Noah nodded decisively. I vote yes. He looked expectantly at his mother. Your turn, Mom. Olivia laughed through her tears, kneeling to pull Noah into their circle. In that case, my vote is yes, too. As Julian gathered them both into his arms, he marveled at how his definition of success had transformed. The empire he'd built paled in comparison to this. A family formed not through biological obligation, but through the daily choice to love, to forgive, to build something lasting together. That evening, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Noah nestled between them, pointing out imaginary constellations. Julian realized that true legacy wasn't measured in corporate acquisitions or technological innovations. It lived in these quiet moments of connection, in sandcastles and bedtime stories, in second chances and forgiven mistakes. In the small miracle of a family rebuilt from the ashes of what they once were, stronger for having been broken, wiser for understanding what they almost lost, and infinitely more precious for having found their way back to each other.